So, the Tory party are mired in sleaze as the election day betting scandal grows arms and legs. Could this be the last straw for the Scottish Tories, said to be considering a breakaway from the Westminster party? John Swinney is under fire again for flip-flopping over his party's views on new oil and gas licences. Will voters in the North East punish them on July the 4th? And the Scottish Greens, who are unlikely to win any seat in this general election, but snatch votes from the SNP, launch their manifesto. I'm Lorna Hughes. I'm joined today by Paul Hutchin and Ben Borland. This is Planet Holyrood.
It's important we look at the facts.
Politics has to be about service.
A modern form of national service.
The outcome, that's for the voters to decide.
Hi, let's get stuck right in. We've got a story that has been developing over the last few days about the Tories and this betting scandal. I can't think of a politics betting scandal that's happened before, but we now have them mired in this kind of murky dealings related to the day of the general election announcement. Now, we've already got, it's now up to 4 people. The director of campaigning is now involved, but it started off with MP under investigation. We've got a police officer who I think was on Sunak's security detail involved as well, and a Tory candidate. Now, the Tory campaigning director, I think, has taken a leave of absence. But this, appears that they've all been putting bets on the date of the election. I mean, you couldn't make this stuff up. But Paul, I mean, is this just making it so much worse for the Tories in the election campaign that's been absolutely rocked by scandal after scandal?
Yeah, I think it's become a cliche to say that this has been the worst ever general election campaign by any party in the history of British politics, and this just goes to confirm it. I mean, without getting into the ins and outs of the bets, because I don't know what has been done here, Sunak just can't get any sort of momentum. Whenever he thinks that maybe one of his policies is landing with the British public, some other scandal erupts in the Conservative Party, derailing his campaign and basically nosediving his poll rating even further. It's just absolutely extraordinary. And I'm always reminded of the old adage that every Labour government always ends in them running out of money, and every Tory government ends in sleaze and scandal. And I think that is just what is going on here. People are just looking at the Conservatives and they just think they're a bunch of sleazy, horrible people, and they're going to take their judgment out on them on July 4th.
Yeah, I mean, you couldn't imagine, yet another financial scandal. I mean, we had obviously their ratings just absolutely plummeted because of the PPE nonsense and the contracts for all their pals. But now it does look like, this group of people, possibly there's even more to come, who have sought to actually make money. And I mean, out of when the general election is going to be called. So trust, I think, is probably just at bottom, Ben, or do you think that this is something that is just a kind of like row in a teacup and it will go away?
Obviously, I've been on this podcast quite a few times now, and usually I'm happy to defend the Tories and put the Conservative point of view. I have to say, I don't see how there's a positive spin to put on this. I mean, perhaps you could say that those involved, it's all allegations at this stage. We don't know that these individuals have done what they're said to have done, but the only thing you could say is perhaps they didn't realise how serious it was going to be, in which case, they shouldn't really be involved in politics or planning a political campaign, if they just think, oh, you know, we've got a bit of a inside steer on the general election, it's going to be a surprise July 4th election, let's stick a few quid on, that's a bit of a laugh. Perhaps they just didn't realise, A, how bad that would look to people, and B, the potential ramifications both for the party's campaign, for Rishi Sunak, who presumably had taken a small group of people into his confidence, and potentially for themselves. I'm not an expert, but potentially this could be a criminal case at some stage. I mean, it depends how big the bets are. I mean, it certainly looks as though the director of the campaign who stepped down, it's the second candidate to be involved in this is his wife, who's standing in Bristol. I mean, I don't know what the odds are. I don't know if it might be interesting to look back. It certainly caught everyone by surprise. It's only the second July election ever, and the previous one was after the end of the Second World War, where there hadn't actually been an election for 10 years. So it was kind of imperative to do one as quickly as possible after VE Day. It's a very unusual time to have called the election. I suspect they got quite good odds on there being a July because it's just such a nutty time to call it. The Scottish school holidays are underway. It's in the middle of the Euros. Wimbledon is getting underway. It clearly caught everyone by surprise, and that's no doubt why they thought, we can. Or if they have placed these bets, why they thought we can make a few quid here. But to answer your question, if the reports are correct, I don't see how you can defend this in any way. No,
I mean, like Rishi, there was a report out yesterday. It looks like, you know, Rishi Sunak will lose his seat, and you know, you're talking kind of wipeout, and yet we're still hearing about financial scandals. I mean, I can't think of a scandal in terms of betting in UK politics. I mean, obviously there has been in Italy.
Is it a scandal? Is that
I think the public would be horrified. I mean, you know, this is a party who gave, you know, multi-million-pound contracts to their pals during COVID. But they're now allegedly taking bets.
Well, but that's a scandal. This is people trying to make money from bookies. There's no public money involved here.
No, of course.
I'm not saying it's not a story, and I'm not saying it's not hugely damaging. I just don't know if, I mean, you'll both know as well as I do in newspapers, we take sort of a bit of thought around when does a crisis become a scandal. I don't know. Is it a scandal? I mean, there's certainly a question of lack of trust, but there's no public money involved here. But it goes again.
It goes again to you know, can we trust these people at all? You know, if that's what they're prepared to do.
Nail in the coffin for them. I mean, you know, we've got this BBC Leaders debate Thursday evening. I would imagine that will dominate Sunak's session. It's just another story that is sucking up valuable oxygen for the Conservatives that they would rather use to promote their policies and batter Labour over tax. And it's just another sign that time's running out for them.
Yeah, and how the Scottish Tories, Paul, likely to deal with this? Because I can imagine it is another head in their hands moment, really.
You know something? I had a conversation with a very senior Scottish Tory today, and that person was sort of mapping out what's going to happen over the next few weeks, which is that the UK Conservatives get absolutely hammered, and then they lurch even further to the right after July 4th, maybe even turning to Nigel Farage, effectively becoming a fringe nationalist populist party. And then the person I was talking to was a arch critic of the Murdo-Fraser plan back in the day for the Scottish Tories to become an independent separate party. But this person is now of the view that this will have to be revisited. So I think there's already conversations going on inside the Scottish Tories about the cord, and I think that they're looking at this result with a sort of increasing sense of alarm that they think that things cannot go on like they have been going on, which is running for cover whenever something happens with the UK Conservative Party, because they're inevitably tarnished with the same brush.
It'll be interesting to see if that, actually happens. As you say, that was mooted. Was it when Murdo ran against Ruth Davidson? Is that correct?
The 2011 Murdo v Ruth contest. It was a great election to cover, I have to say. You had one candidate effectively saying that the party he wanted to be leader of should be abolished. Ruth was the establishment figure backed by the party machine. In the end, she won comfortably, but there's been a sort of feeling amongst Tories that maybe Murdo was right. And if the sort of prophecy of the person I was talking to this morning comes to pass, I think there's every chance that, if not independence, then a sort of loosening of the ties with the UK party.
It's interesting. And Swinney came under a bit of fire from actually Douglas Ross today at First Minister's Questions, again for the oil and gas licences, which has been a bit tricky for them. They've been either been flip-flopping or not being entirely honest. You know, I'm not sure. But they're obviously now saying that they will grant them on a case-by-case basis, or look at them on a case-by-case basis. I mean, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of jobs in the Northeast. What do you think voters or people who are voting in the election, you know, who may well not want the reliance on oil that we've had for obviously decades, but during this current kind of cost of living crisis and fuel bills are soaring, that they may just say, do you know what? We don't need to lose any more jobs. We need to protect the economy, and it's not. We should actually be continuing to grant them if they are looking to get green jobs out of them in the long run.
I think there's a lot to unpack there. I think that clearly, if you live in the Northeast and you're employed in the oil and gas industry, you'll probably be sceptical about claims that when oil and gas winds down, tens of thousands of jobs are miraculously going to appear. So they'll be hearing stuff about Labour and GB Energy, but I think there'll be scepticism that many jobs will actually materialise, because they've heard it before. They heard Alex Salmond say that Scotland has become the Saudi Arabia of renewables, and that never came to pass. So, you know, forgive people for being cynical when politicians promise lots of jobs. But on the issue of taxing oil and gas giants, I think that the average person on the street, someone who lives in the Central Belt, for instance, will be furious at the fact that they've been clobbered for about a year now with sky-high energy prices. And I don't think they'll lose any sleep whatsoever over Labour's plan to increase the windfall tax. So I think it depends where you live. But if you don't live in the northeast of Scotland, you're not going to be crying yourself to sleep over the fact that BP and Shell are going to have to pay a bit more. But there's no doubt that if you live in Aberdeen, Aberdeenshire, and your job depends on that industry, you're going to be worried about what's going to happen after July 4th.
Ben, what's your thoughts on the SNP's kind of stance on this at the moment?
I think you summed it up, Lorna. That they're just flip-flopping. You've got John Swinney says no more exploration, then Kate Forbes says, well, we'll take it on a case-by-case basis, and then Stephen Flynn says something else, and then they go back to the original position, and then they flip-flop again. The manifesto was very sort of woolly on this. I mean, you can't also get away from the fact that Stephen Flynn is not going to be the Prime Minister. The SNP is not going to form the next UK government, and therefore, the SNP. One thing that is correct, one of the few things that is correct in their manifesto, is that they say the UK government decides on oil and gas exploration licenses, and therefore, what the SNP think about it doesn't really matter. I mean, it doesn't matter what the Greens think about it. It doesn't matter what the Lib Dems think about it. All that matters are what Labour and the Tories think about it, because they're the only two parties that are going to form that have a chance of forming the next UK government. So the SNP, they can afford to be woolly, and they can afford, if this sort of fudge was in either of the two main UK parties' manifestos, there'd be an outcry, because the oil and gas companies would be saying, look, we need to know, we need certainty. What are you going to do? But the SNP get away with playing, riding two different horses at the same time, because actually their opinion and their stance on this doesn't change anything. I mean, we've heard before from BP when it cancelled one of its, it was the Rosebank field, where they said, look, it's Nicola Sturgeon's attitude and her negative approach has contributed to us pulling out. But ultimately, the SNP can't grant a new licence, and they can't not grant a new licence. And equally, they can't impose taxes. So their position on this, it's quite frustrating, because they can and do try and play both sides of the argument to appeal to voters in the northeast, but also appeal to people, perhaps younger voters, who are much more concerned about the climate. So they're allowed to get away with this sort of two-faced position, is my view on it.
And you mentioned the Greens there. They launched their manifesto this morning, which obviously mentions a lot about oil, gas and all of that. But it's actually 56 pages, and again, it's more detailed and less woolly than the SNP manifesto. You wouldn't be surprised, you won't be surprised, it's about ending the benefit cap and abolishing bedroom tax, and obviously raising taxes for the super rich. But again, Ben, it's probably a manifesto that, does it even really matter? What I found quite interesting is that there is no mention of the failed DRS in it at all, not that I can see, and a very, very brief mention of the kind of doomed GRR bill, and that only blames Westminster. I mean, Paul, how do you think, obviously the Green Manifesto will be appealing to, a certain amount of people. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at it, but what are your thoughts?
But I'm not on as much of a downer as everyone else is on the Scottish Greens in a devolved context. I think obviously the DRS was a complete and utter dog's breakfast, and that's on Lorna Slater. But I'm not a Green hater. But when it comes to the general election, I did struggle to give any sort of interest in what the Scottish Greens are saying, because they're not going to win any seats, and I don't think they're standing in every contest. To say it's irrelevant is an understatement. I'm more interested in what the Greens have got to say at a Holyrood election, not in a first past the post contest that, frankly, they're not even also rans in. What's interesting for the Greens is whether they actually win enough votes in some of these constituencies to actually result in the SNP losing the contest.
Yes.
So you might find that they win 1,000 votes in a couple of Glasgow constituencies, and that sees Labour and maybe leapfrog the SNP. So I think that the manifesto and the Green standing is more interesting for what it says about the lack of unity in the independence movement. Obviously, they were kicked out of government, and Patrick Harvey said today he doesn't agree with the SNP strategy on securing independence through the general election. I think it's more about the fact that there is massive disunity in the yes ranks than any policy commitments in a manifesto that's never going to have the chance of being implemented.
Yeah, they obviously talk about independence, within that as well, and talk about, their policies and the framework of independence. So you're right, it's how many votes they will take away from the SNP. Alba, to a lesser extent, will be there as well. So, yeah, the people who vote Green could determine, as you say, the SNP actually losing some seats. Ben?
Just on the Greens, I think the the most significant contribution from the Scottish Greens in the election has actually come from their former leader, Robin Harper. And I know there's
Who
been
joined Labour.
Who joined Labour, and he's been pictured stuffing envelopes in Ian Murray's campaign office. I just think there's a large constituency of people in Scotland who are concerned about the environment and are maybe more traditional environmentalists in the Robin Harper mould who'll see that as a encouragement to vote Labour, and the Labour's stance on North Sea oil and gas won't do them any harm with that group of people. I mean, Paul's right. The Scottish Greens are a major player at the Holyrood election. I just some of their policies aren't particularly related to the environment in any way. Obviously, they're now very much part of the independence movement. They're very much part of sort of various sort of wings of politics that don't have very much or anything at all to do with the environment. I sometimes wonder if we talk about parties splintering, and perhaps there's room for a new Green Party, one that says, look, we're neutral on the Constitution, we're neutral on all these other issues, but we've got a stance on the environment, we've got a stance on green issues. But either way, I certainly think Robin Harper will have done more to sway voters than either Patrick Harvie or Lorna Slater have done today.
Okay. Listen, thanks very much to both of you for joining me today. The Planet Holyrood podcast is on the Daily Records YouTube channel and also on Spotify. And we will see you tomorrow.
Thank you.
It's important we look at the facts. Politics has to be about service.
A modern form of national service.
The outcome, that's for the voters to decide.